So we're back. This is video 2 for Bank Secrecy Act. So we just got finished talking about how there's a predicate crime, right? Something bad happens before, there's drug sales or something like that. Then they do the placement, they get that cash into the banking system. Then there's layering, so they're kind of moving it around, hiding it. Frequently that's going through different countries. Then there's integration, which they're integrating it back into the normal system. It looks like clean money and they can use it. So we talked about those 4 steps, and now we're kind of up to talking a bit more specifics and what we can do about it. Alright, so money gets laundered through normal legitimate businesses. So like your banks out there, your car dealerships out there, they buy cars and turn around and sell them. They buy real estate, turn around and sell it. They buy legitimate stuff, they put it in legitimate banks, right? So that has to be the point where we're stopping the money laundering. Alright, so they're going to just, to get it legitimate, they have to use some legitimate outlets, right? So that's where we're able to stop it, right? So the U.S. has come up with sets of laws over the years, and they've refined them as they learn more about money laundering and what they're doing. All right. So the first law that was out even before my time, was already there when I started my banking career, was the Bank Secrecy Act. So this act requires banks to create what's called a currency transaction report. And this currency transaction report, CTR, is filled out and reported for any currency, so like cash dollars, any currency, not a check, right? Not a wire transfer or anything like that, but cash money, currency, greenbacks that come or go, has to have this form filled out, even if it's legitimate, right? So you could have $10,000 in currency, right? So let's say you save $1,000 from your pay every month, and you end up with, after a year, you got $12,000 sitting around the house. Oh, well, I better put that in the bank, right? So you go to the bank, they're going to fill this out, right? It's fine. It doesn't mean you've done any crime, just that they want to track the currency. All right, so this can give law enforcement an idea who's doing a lot of stuff with cash. Nothing wrong, nothing illegal to have $10,000 in cash if it's from a legitimate place. So this is helping them track, the CTR form helps track who's doing currency transactions. Well, what the money launderers figured out was, oh, I can go put $9,000 in the bank, and they won't fill out that form. So in '86, a few years later, they came up with the Money Laundering Control Act, right? And so it makes money laundering and structuring crimes. So structuring is when you arrange a transaction to avoid filling out a CTR. So let's say you've taken this class and you know, oh, if I put $12,000 in the bank, they're going to fill out that form on me, and I just don't want to do that. I don't want that inconvenience. I don't want the government having my name or whatever reason. All right. Well, so if you say, I'll take $5,000 this week and $7,000 next week, and then I'll get my $12,000 deposited, and I won't have to fill out the form. You just structured, right? So that in itself is a crime. And they made that because, well, that's what the money launderers were doing. They would break up their transactions, or they would spread transactions across several people. They would use people, they call these people smurfs. And so they would smurf people, and everybody would get $3,000, and they would actually get legitimate real people. They'd like, hey, they'd tell them some lie, right? Like, oh, my bank closed my account because I bounced too many checks. Will you deposit this for me and get me a cashier's check? I'll give you $100, right? Stuff like that. They get people to smurf for them. So anyway, so the actual structuring is a crime. All right. So even though your money's from a legitimate source and you have every right to have that money, if you try to avoid the CTR, that's a crime. All right. So the next thing they came up with, because they realized people were smurfing, right? They'd send a person in the bank, hey, here's $3,000, here's $5,000. Go in there and take this cash and put it in your account, right, a legitimate account, and get a money order and bring that back to me, and I'll give you $50, you know, whatever, they do that, all right? So to prevent this smurfing and using cashier's checks, money orders, stuff like that, to prevent the smurfing, they came up with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, right? So now, anytime a monetary instrument over $3,000, so a monetary instrument would be like a cashier's check, a money order, traveler's checks, if they even still have those. But anyway, anything that's kind of like currency that can be exchanged among people in exchange for currency. So if all these other organizations, because they also realized people were going in and buying cars for cash. People were going and buying condominiums for cash. And then they'd turn around and sell them, and then it's like legitimate. So now, organizations have to make sure that they're not accepting monetary instruments. Well, they can issue them and they can use them, but if they're over $3,000, they have to verify ID, and there's a special log. They log them in. So if you went to a bank and bought a $5,000 money order, they would log you in on their log. They would ask for your ID. They wouldn't just exchange it for cash. And so that's a new law. Finally, after 9/11, and they realized, oh my goodness, terrorists are using these fake enterprises to get money to do their terrorist activities, and the banks are accepting deposits, thinking these are legitimate businesses, but they haven't really checked them out enough to know. They came up with this Patriot Act. So a big part of the Patriot Act is that you have actual knowledge of who your customer is. In fact, they call it Know Your Customer. All right? And this means that just because somebody shows up at your bank with an assumed name certificate, that you don't just assume that that's their legitimate business, that you have to check into it and know it a little bit. And this was a big downfall for some banks. This part, the Know Your Customer, was a big downfall for our case we're going to discuss later this week that you're going to upload. So Know Your Customer requires you know that that's a legitimate customer. You're not just accepting money across the border. They say they're a cambio, but are they? How do you know that, right? So now we've got this law that you actually know who these people are and what they're doing. All right, so all these laws are requiring logs and forms and transaction reports and suspicious activity reports. So what goes on with that? Well, there is an organization called FinCEN. It stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And FinCEN is the anti-money laundering agency. They're a branch of the federal government. And when a bank fills out one of these CTRs or fills out a suspicious activity report, they send it to FinCEN. All right, so FinCEN is the place where they're going to organize it, right? We've got a central place for all this stuff to go in. They have experts. That might be a cool job for one of you. If you like fraud stuff, if you like law enforcement stuff, maybe yeah, like you like accounting and finance, plus you like law enforcement, maybe FinCEN would be a cool place for you. So FinCEN coordinates all of the suspicious activity reports, and they investigate it, and they find out, oh, hey, that is money laundering, right? So that's what FinCEN is. Here's what a CTR looks like, and you can see it's a lengthy form. This is just page 1. There's actually another page. So the banks are required to get the ID, go online, fill these forms out, send them to FinCEN, and every time somebody comes in with currency to a bank and tries to make that deposit, or withdraws, actually, it's either way, withdraw or deposit, they fill out one of these, all right? And you can actually go online and look up and see how many of these were reported, actually, by county. It's a thing you can actually look up, public information. You can't look up the form, but you can see, in Clayburgh County, how many of these were done. And it's interesting to look that stuff up and see what counties have a lot of suspicious activities. Anyway, that's a CTR. So someday if you work at a financial institution, you might be responsible for those. there's this form called a SAR, a Suspicious Activity Report, and so let's suppose somebody doesn't get a CTR filled out. They come in with $12,000 and the teller says, hey, I'm going to fill out this form. And they say, well, this cash is legal. So I know it is, but it's just the law. I have to fill out this form. And they say, oh, never mind. And they leave. Guess what? That's suspicious. So there's a form for that, right? And there's other suspicious activities. Like let's suppose somebody's running a small shop, a bakery or something, and every week they're coming in with $4,000 in cash, depositing it. Well, that's a lot of donuts, right? So maybe the bank starts to get suspicious, so they fill this out. So this can be used for any suspicious activities, right? And it goes to FinCEN, and then they're the ones that'll figure out if it's money laundering or not, right? It's not the bank's job to investigate. It's the bank's job to alert FinCEN to these possible suspicious activities. And it is required. It is something that a bank has to be in compliance with. All right. So, actually, we're not in class anymore, right? So we would discuss having a suspicious activity report for anything that's suspicious. They even fill these out for employees who steal, right? Like we had this suspicious activity, this employee was doing a crime. So any red flags, you would fill out one of those suspicious activity reports. And that's it for Bank Secrecy Act. What I'd like you to do before the end of the week is go do that Bank Secrecy Act case. It's pretty interesting. I think you'll like it. You're going to read about an actual money laundering situation that occurred at a bank here in South Texas. They, not on purpose, accidentally got involved with some people who were laundering money. They didn't fill out the proper forms. They just weren't complying with the laws. And it all happened because they didn't know their customer, right? So a big part of the Patriot Act was know your customer, and knowing who you're dealing with is important when it comes to stopping money laundering. Just like it is any crime, right? You know who you're dealing with. All right, so I'll see you soon. Take care.